Take a network break. Enjoy a virtual donut as we meander through this week's IT and tech news. We've got an IBM and Palo Alto Networks team up, a merger in the SIEM security space, Cisco financial results, solar storms, and more. We're sponsored today by Nokia. Its network operating system, SR Linux, is built from the ground up to simplify data center operations and integrations while giving you the ultimate in visibility and flexibility. Find out more about SR Linux at learn.srlinux.dev. That's learn.srlinux.dev. Just a note, I'm co-hosting a webinar on May 22nd on the 7 habits of highly effective data center networkers with Juniper Networks. It is a sponsored webinar. We're going to talk about the 7 habits, how to incorporate them into your day-to-day work, and share real-world stories about these habits. We'll also talk about Appster, which is Juniper's intent-based automation platform. I'm going to be joined by Juniper's Jay Gill and Jeff Doyle on the webinar. You may have heard of Jeff. He's the author of multiple networking books, including Routing and TCP/IP. There's also a live Q&A, so if you ever had a question for Jeff, this is your chance. You can sign up for this at juniper.net/habits. That's juniper.net/habits, May 22nd. Last piece of business, we want to let our subscribers to the Fat Pipe channel know that we are slimming down the Fat Pipe. Starting in June, we're going to be removing shows from the Fat Pipe. By September, the Fat Pipe will just be for heavy networking, network break, and day 2 cloud. And the reason is when we started the Fat Pipe, I think, Greg, we only had like 3 shows at the time, and now we're up to 8 or 9. So the Fat Pipe just got too fat.
Yeah, people said I don't want to have to subscribe to them individually, so we'll just put them. Oh, we also had there was a 3rd show that published occasionally that we used to have. Mm-hmm. And so people said, if you could just put them all into one feed so I could just consume everything. But the mathematics of modern results, like, numbers and what vendors want to see when you say, if they're going to say, I'm going to sponsor a show, how many downloads, how many subscribers, that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it's becoming less and less practical for us. And then also the fact that some people are saying there's just so much content in those feeds that they're just not seeing it all. And our numbers reflect that people aren't clicking play on as many shows.
Yeah.
So we're going to go back to, the Fat Pipe is just the core packet pushes, properties, network break, heavy networking, and day 2 cloud. And then the other shows you can go, so heavy wireless, for example, you go and search for that, add that in separately. Packet Protector, which is the security podcast that you do, Drew, of course. IPv6 Buzz, which has been very popular. A lot of people are listening to IPv6 Buzz and getting a lot out of it. But that will also move into its own channel, so you'll have to go and subscribe to that separately. And there are other channels. We've got some new channels coming up in the near future, so watch out for those. Make sure that if you suddenly disappear, know that you've got to go and subscribe to them individually. Of course, all you got to do is go into your podcatcher, search on the word, and you'll find it. Or just search on Packet Pushers, and you'll see them all listed.
Yep, packetpushers.net or your favorite podcatcher app. All right, let's get into some news. Palo Alto Networks is buying the SaaS version of QRadar from IBM. QRadar is a SIEM/SOAR product for threat detection and response. As part of the deal, customers of the SaaS version are going to be migrated to Palo Alto Networks Cortex XSIAM, which is a SOC platform.
Now, this is a weird one, Drew. You picked up on what most of the websites talked about, which was that Palo Alto is buying a product, a SaaS SIEM SOAR product from IBM. But if you actually read the rest of the announcement, I think this is much more significant than just acquiring a product that nobody's ever heard of. I mean, have you heard of QRadar? It doesn't strike me as being overly successful.
I have. It's that they've been around for a while, so yes, I have heard of them. But when things go into IBM, they tend to get lost.
Yeah, so it's a SaaS service. It's sort of a SOC/SIEM/SIAM. Is that what they call it?
Yep.
Yeah. All, and my general assumption would be that it's not managed to achieve a lot of scale. And so selling it to Palo Alto, and they say in the press release, Palo Alto Networks and IBM will facilitate the migration of QRadar SaaS clients to Cortex XSIAM, which is, of course, the cloud-hosted platform that Palo runs. And you might think that's the whole thing, but if you actually read through the whole announcement, IBM says it's going to platformize internal security solutions with Palo Alto Networks, and Palo Alto Networks will be its preferred cybersecurity partner across network, cloud, and SOC. Mm-hmm. So what I'm reading there is IBM saying, or at least saying here, IBM's a big company, so just because it says it doesn't mean it's actually true, because there's many business units, many things. But what this part of IBM is at least saying is that they're going to nominally have Palo Alto Networks as a preferred cybersecurity partner.
Yep.
Now, if Palo Alto can make it that way, then IBM will lead with Palo Alto networking security products whenever it goes out to its client base and does consulting and so forth, right? There was another point in there.
IBM said it's training 1,000 consultants to provide, quote, migration, deployment, and adoption services across Palo Alto Networks platform. And that just must have Palo Alto Networks salivating like, yes, 1,000 IBM consultants singing our praises.
Yeah, big companies say things. It's like manifesting. It's one of those. But I mean, like, there's a bunch of headcount associated with QRadar who must now be, either moving to Palo or moving to support XSIAM. Mm-hmm. You could put that headcount in here. It's entirely reasonable, but that's 500 people there just who are now security consultants on the migration, adoption, and deployment. There's a lot of ways you can splice this up, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the other thing that it says is IBM will bolster its leading security services to drive a significant book of business in cybersecurity and AI, featuring Palo Alto Networks platforms in its expanded portfolio. So again, repeating what we've already said, IBM saying that they're going to put Palo Alto into their business book so that they can go out to customers and say, look, we've got a very strong partnership, a special partnership with Palo. You should be buying their products from us, of course, and we'll go and do that. And then the last part was Palo Alto will be incorporating Watson X large language models into Cortex to deliver additional precision AI trademark precision AI there, solution. So, just to make that deal a little sweeter, somebody said, why you should be using our AI and not someone else's LLMs.
Yes.
And and I imagine that Palo Alto went, sure, we could do that. Not going to, what's the difference between OpenAI or, one of the other LLMs that's out there? Sure, we can do that as, in the interest of an overall deal. So yeah. I actually think this is much more strategic. If you sort of pick away at this, Palo Alto's managed to basically turn IBM into a reseller for its products.
Pretty much.
And strategically, it could be significant, but it could be nothing, Drew. How many times have you seen IBM buy a product like QRadar, for example, and sort of wander off into the some sort of pariah in the desert sort of thing?
Yeah, exactly. That's what it feels like to me, that Palo Alto Networks is essentially getting a sweetheart deal from IBM, that IBM's like, yeah, if we have a customer who's asking us about security solutions, we'll just steer them to you, which who knows how much revenue in the end it'll generate for Palo Alto Networks, but it's better than nothing. And Palo Alto's, aside from saying, sure, we'll play with your little Watson X thing, so you can put out a press release about it. Yes, that's fine. It seems like
now
this
the
deal
real
is
work starts.
Very, very beneficial for Palo Alto Networks.
And now the real work starts, because Palo is now going to have to get inside of IBM. It's going to have to send in an engagement team to try and get a hold of all of it and get in touch with all of the consultants that IBM has around the world. It's not like IBM people are suddenly going to go, we've got this, now we can go and do it. They're going to have to go out and proselytize inside the organization. It's like watching startups get acquired by VMware or Cisco. When you talk to them, they say like, we spent years moving up, talking internally to get our product noticed by people, inside of these organizations. It's going to be very difficult to make that happen. And I just point out that this is actually something that Palo's done again. They did it with Google a while back. Remember, I don't know if you remember, about a year ago, they announced a special partnership with Google, and Palo Alto's cybersecurity platform had expanded privileges on the Google Cloud platform. And then Palo announced that they were using Google Cloud almost exclusively to host all of their services. And then they've started to provide expanded partnerships with Google. So they've become a cybersecurity partner with Google. So maybe that's a sign that worked. And that was so successful, and then potentially they've decided to try it again over at IBM. But this partnerships model is a way for them to grow in an unusual, non-organic, just go in and knock doors with enterprise sales reps.
Yeah. One last note on this. IBM is keeping the on-prem version of Q1 Labs. So this deal is just for the SaaS customers of Q1 Labs. So I guess IBM isn't entirely getting out of the SIEM business.
Yeah, I guess if they're on-prem, maybe they want to hold on to that. And you never know who they might have sold it to, like federals or govs or something.
Yep.
And there's a bunch of restricted access in the back there. And Palo hasn't focused so much on that business. It's not historically been into that regulated cybersecurity arm. So maybe there's something in the back end there that's going to take some time to work out, because to go through those approvals and get listed on those contracts as an approved government supplier for, European governments, UK governments, US governments, does take a while.
Yeah, that could be. Or I also think these on-prem versions tend to be sticky and pricey. So IBM may be like, we'll keep that revenue, but you can have the SaaS customers.
I think it's more like the approvals associated around it. Like,
Could be.
QRadar might have spent 5 years getting an approval and 10 years getting on, being successful on those federal contracts, with various governments. Mm-hmm. You don't want to suddenly say, oh, no, we're done with that.
Yeah.
Done with that. Yes. And then say, we're going to go and get Palo, we're going to move all that to Palo Alto and then get that certified for these contracts. That's not how those things work.
Yeah. All right, links in the show notes. We'll move on to other SIEM-related news. SIEM maker LogRhythm is merging with Exabeam, also a SIEM provider. The merger, to quote the press release, will leverage the complementary strengths from each organization to take AI-driven security operations to new heights. LogRhythm is currently owned by private equity firm Thoma Bravo. Exabeam is a private company. It's raised $391 million in VC money over the last 10 years.
Yeah, so two companies owned by Thoma Bravo. Thoma, of course, is a private equity firm that does spend a lot of money buying up a certain size of a certain successful type of company to bring into its private equity portfolio.
They've got quite a number. I was looking at the list. Companies like SonicWall, Barracuda, other names you will have heard of are in the Thoma Bravo portfolio.
Yeah, dozens, maybe hundreds.
Yeah.
Not just cybersecurity, but just technology companies as a general sort of a thing. And then what they do every now and then is pick them up, and sometimes they take this bit out and move it to that and, whatever. But to move these two together, I think, is a recognition of something that we've been saying, which is there's no need for 350 vendors in the cybersecurity space, or the 800 or what they're, depending on who's defining the category. How big is the cybersecurity market?
Right.
And these are both quite well-established companies. They're both more than 10, sometimes 20 years old. They're well-established. They've got a footprint inside of organizations. And then I'd say about half of their products overlap substantially. So by merging them together, there's a lot of efficiencies that could be gained. Mm-hmm. So removes a lot of overhead, but there's some adjacencies here for customers saying, SIEM LogRhythm does SIEM, so does Exabeam, of course, but LogRhythm has network monitoring. So it's doing packet capture from L2 to L7 and then able to do like a really bunch of analytics and stuff on that, whereas Exabeam has really made a focus of its behavioral analytics and log management. So from the logs, it's then using behavioral engines to do automated investigations. So I think there's a fair bit of synergy. Ooh, I hate myself.
Put a quarter in the jar.
So there is some, adjacencies between these two, but it does feel like these two companies compete head to head. There's no reason for both of them to exist, so we should rationalize, and that should make them both more profitable. But of course, for customers, that means some products are going to end, some products are going to whatever. But as is always said, if when private equity comes a knocking, it's time to start migrating or looking carefully at what your supply chain looks like. And this is the sort of reason why we say that.
Yeah. I also will note that in an article about the Palo Alto Networks news, the Palo Alto Networks CEO said in an interview with CNBC that they wanted to be better prepared to go up against Cisco, since the Splunk acquisition. Splunk is also a major force in the SIEM market. So I also wonder if Cisco buying Splunk sort of set the cat among the pigeons in the SIEM space. And this LogRhythm and Exabeam team up seems like part of that as well. People are like, all right, there's too many of us. Let's consolidate and be stronger to compete against the big dog.
Yeah, I do. I mean, we'll talk about Cisco in a minute, but Cisco is not positioning Splunk as a SIEM. It's saying it's a data analytics platform. So they're not focusing the messaging on saying it's a security tool. They are leading, it is the primary use of Splunk has been around security, but it was used for so much more in the back. I would think that Cisco wants to imagine that they can make it grow by being more than just a cybersecurity tool, because just being a SIEM would actually shrink that business.
Yeah, I guess, if you can call it a data analytics tool and talk about AI, et cetera, then you could, and it can collect all kinds of different logs. So yes, you could say it's a just general analytics platform with security capabilities on top, sure. And I can see them positioning that to get to as many people as possible. And we will talk about that later. Yeah. Yep. But let's get an update from the chip files. Google's announced a new version of its tensor processing unit, or TPU, dubbed Trillium. This 6th generation chip promises almost 5 times the peak compute performance of the previous version and is 67% more energy efficient, according to Google. TPUs are competing with GPUs as the silicon of choice for AI model training and inference. Right now, Nvidia is the belle of the ball with its GPUs and software framework. So I'm not sure what kind of market share Google has with its TPUs, but I'm assuming it pales in comparison to Nvidia.
So Google's TPUs are competitive with Nvidia's Blackwell GPUs. I've been reading various bits and pieces about that. They're not, it's one of the sort of, it's the chocolate and strawberry ice cream of the thing. Some people like strawberry, some people like chocolate, and there are things that Google's TPUs are good at, and there's good things that Nvidia's. But the main thing about these is that Google's TPUs run with Google's software libraries, and Nvidia's GPUs run Nvidia's software libraries. And so if you're a cloud company like Google Cloud, then you have a bunch of Nvidia GPUs around so that you can offer to customers the Nvidia library so that they can run them on their cloud, right?
Yep.
Same way for AWS and for Azure. But Google also says you can use our TPUs. Now, and my understanding is that the Trillium GPUs are still way more efficient power-wise. They're not particularly faster, I think, was the takeaway that I was talking about. And it is, but much more power efficient. They do certain things faster, certain things slower. It sort of works out about the same as the easier, but, come see, come SaaS sort of thing. And they're saying here, like, 6th generation TPU, 5x performance over previous, powers AI, hypercomputer architecture. I continue to see a lot of rumors around Twitter and various analyst reports that Broadcom was heavily involved here. I think we talked about it 4 or 5 weeks ago that Broadcom was talking about XPUs. And the rumor then was that they had been doing some work with Google's TPUs. And the suggestion here might be that they weren't necessarily designing the processing architecture, but they were providing the intellectual property around a 400 gig networking interface so that the TPU can talk directly. It doesn't have to talk, memory to TPU, memory out through the NIC. There's actually a straight up network interface on the ASIC, and that's part of the power advantage that this has. And Google may have licensed or co-worked with Broadcom on that to be able to do it. Or maybe they used Broadcom to be able to say, like, Google designed the chip and then went to Broadcom and said, can help us to manufacture it. There's once you design a chip, there's also a manufacturing phase.
Yep.
And a lot of companies that design chips then go to a manufacturer like Broadcom, who then goes to the fab, which is a third step, right? So you might design a chip and then go to Broadcom and say, can you turn this into something that can actually be produced at TSMC or Intel, because each of those fabs have different technologies and they're not the same. And so then they go and say, oh, well, if you're going to do this on TSMC, this is the process steps that it needs to run through to actually manufacture that chip. And so there's lots of different ways. I could see that Google maybe turned to Broadcom to do the actual manufacturing design. And then, of course, TSMC then did the production, the actual fabrication of the chip. So there's lots of ways this could go here, but I think the point here is that, Google's TPUs, which are their own, they've been doing them much longer than Nvidia has, in the sense that, Google's been offering AI and machine learning on its own custom chips, are keeping pace with Nvidia, which I think is the takeaway here.
Yeah, I feel that takeaway as well. And I feel there's an article, we'll have a link in the show notes, that does a pretty good job, I think, of explaining the differences between TPUs and GPUs. And it says that one advantage TPUs have is higher performance per watt, i.e. better energy efficiency. And we are seeing, the AI gold rush straining the capacity of electricity providers to generate enough power for data centers. So maybe in the long run, that efficiency advantage could carry more weight. We'll see. I'm not well versed enough in this space to make a declaration, but there are competitors out there to Nvidia.
Yeah, that's right. And Nvidia is not going to go unchallenged. There's just too much money around for that not to be challenged. I did read an interesting article this week. They're originally people who were talking about hydrogen fuel, and they were predicting that the rollout of solar and wind would result in so much unused energy that it would just be used to make hydrogen. And that's why hydrogen cars were going to be a thing, right? Or hydrogen trucks. But it turns out all of the extra energy that we're now producing from solar and wind is going to data centers. It's going into AI. And that is not exactly what the articles I was reading about and the research I was reading said, but there was a sort of the illusion is like, we are not consuming less energy, we are consuming more.
Right.
And so that it's not, there is a definite concern, and I think you'll see more and more sort of foreboding coming in around here saying that AI's got a power consumption problem. And if it continues to grow, and the amount of money, like I read an article this week that said they believe that $300 billion has been invested in AI and the revenues to date is $2 billion. So if you wonder why I'm a little cautious on AI and not, predicting an immediate the revolution, I think I'm just not sure that the money is there at this point. I do feel like we're going to go, something more like the year 2000 thing. There's going to be a realization that AI is just not going to change everything. and produce money. It just might not.
Yeah, that's very much a possibility. All right, we'll pause for a message from sponsor Nokia. Why should you care about the network OS running your data center? Nokia designed SR Linux to support automation, orchestration, and customization. We did a recent Tech Bytes podcast with SR Linux where we dug into its support for Yang and GNMI to show how that support ties into northbound orchestration platforms. We also discussed how SR Linux provides streaming telemetry and Nokia's development kit that lets you customize this Linux-based network OS. You can find that Tech Bytes in the show notes that accompany this episode, which is Network Break 479, or search packetpushers.net. You can also just get more details for yourself at learn.srlinux.dev. That's learn.srlinux.dev. Getting back to the news, the U.S. government has halted licenses that let some chip makers sell products to Chinese company Huawei. Affected companies include Intel and Qualcomm. That's according to a story by the BBC.
Yeah, so this goes on in the trade wars, the geopolitics that affects our industry these days. And we saw some sanctions come in a couple of years ago where the US government restricted what chips can be sold to China, especially around GPUs and AI. And this has been steadily expanded by the current US administration. And I will note, however, that most US companies just took the sanctions as a design challenge and then proceeded to design chips around the sanctions. Basically sanctions busting. The government did it for, security reasons, national security reasons. But, companies like Nvidia ran out and produced GPUs that met the exact precise wording on the sanction, on the trade restrictions, but not the purpose or the spirit. And Intel was another one in that same. It was still selling its CPUs, particularly in large numbers, to the Chinese market. And was actually turned around and said, we'll just make CPUs that fit the Chinese market. That was not the intention of the legislation at all. So governments, of course, are slow and generally careful, which is a desirable thing. You don't want a government to come down with a hammer because the hammer tends to be very, very large. So when they do make a move, the consequences generally take a time to come through. I think importantly here, Intel's not the only company that's being restricted from sending chips. They're the headline one. Obviously, Intel's struggling its way through a restructuring. And so most of the press articles go like, Intel's chips can't be sent to China. That's not exactly what's happening here. But it is worth pointing out that Intel is now the recipient of many tens of billions of dollars of free money from the CHIPS Acts in the US. And they've also been the recipient of several billion, euros from various to put businesses into the European operations. Mm-hmm. If they want to continue to sort of, bite the hand that feeds them, I think they're going to find, there's going to be some calls going on that are going to be fairly tense between people who are literally giving you billions of dollars.
They're going to have to finally calibrate how hard they bite down.
Yeah. I think that, the governments are very, very good at saying this is the legislation. What we really want to see is this is the spirit of the legislation. Stop trying to end run around it.
Yeah, I will note the prohibition of technology exports to China started under the Trump administration, but have been carried forward by the Biden administration. These restrictions certainly have spurred China's development of homegrown technology and really haven't seemed to blunt Huawei's ability to make and sell network gear and smartphones. But it is part of a larger ongoing strategy. Also, frankly, it's an election year here in the U.S. So whether or not it's a sensible or effective policy, things like export bans and tariffs tend to get carted out in election time.
Yeah, I see these sanctions as broadly bipartisan. I don't think when either party gets back into power, when the election cycle finishes, at the end of this year, early next year, I don't think the sanctions will be revoked by either party, particularly once they're in place. Sometimes they will.
Yeah, no, I don't see that either.
But I think China's working very hard on homegrown alternatives. So it's been buying up chip making. It's got whole universities dedicated to building CPUs and designing operating systems. And the Chinese government has provided really large financial and administrative support. So land, straight up money to build companies around this, money, advancing capital and loans to go and buy equipment to be able to do this. There was some, and they're very multi-pronged. There was a movement to go and get the RISC-V chipset and to start using that as an alternative because it's an open source. And I know that some of the governments have been looking at that and going like, we need to stop that as well. But there is a chip, I believe there is a CPU being designed in China. And I also point out that the Chinese Communist Party recently banned Microsoft Windows in government I think they went with a really aggressive timeline sometime in 2025, I want to say. But but they're saying like we shouldn't be using Microsoft Windows. We need our own. Therefore, we're going to ban it. I think it'll be like most governments. Sometimes these things are, we're putting the ban in place, but we can always change our mind later.
Yeah.
So,
right.
But I think it's sort of saying there's an opportunity here for somebody to stand up and promote an alternative to Microsoft Windows. And they're saying there's a market in government if you can get something up and running.
Will China finally be the home of the Linux desktop? Maybe that's what we need, this trade war to bring it home.
Well, in theory, they are already substantial contributors to much of Linux today.
Mm-hmm.
But the Linux desktop, it has, if they were to allocate, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000 people to making that work, it's not
unfeasible. No.
It might not be awesome for a few years. I mean, if you take the fact that Microsoft Windows after 30 years, it still isn't very good. Maybe it doesn't have to be that great.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah, that's the thing. These trade restrictions definitely go two ways. So something to consider. Moving on, we often talk about space networking on Network Break, but we also like to talk about space weather. A recent solar storm was one of the strongest in 20 years. These storms have the potential to play havoc with electronics, but the effects from this event were relatively minor. There was an article I read in Scientific American discussing precautions some companies took. For example, a company that provides streaming video service from low Earth orbit satellites powered down a bunch of satellites for 4 days during the storm to minimize the chance of frying electronic equipment. An electricity utility in New Zealand turned off some circuits for a day. And I guess in the U.S., some tractors that operate via GPS were affected. The GPS systems were affected by the solar storm.
Yeah, solar storms are one of the things that you can put into a science fiction novel as an apocalypse.
Totally.
If you want
Yep.
and bring in that whole story, the world's been destroyed after a solar storm, and it's entirely reasonable. We have seen, and actually the sunspots weather or the solar weather is actually continuous. And this is actually a period of hot, known and predicted high sunspot activity and mass coronal ejections are expected at this time. And there is a lot of monitoring going on.
Uh-huh.
There are satellites. Literally, we've sent satellites to the sun to be able to watch this and find out about it.
Uh-huh.
And so these satellites that have been placed in sun orbit or solar orbit are giving us advance warning. And this was one of the largest solar events to happen since 2003. I don't know about you, Drew, but I was listening to all of the conspiracy theorists saying that it's Jewish space lasers or something weird.
God.
But I was outside charging up my chakras and getting my aura, absorbing to make my aura get better.
Are you glowing?
Well, it's entirely organic. Well, this, a solar storm is an organic event. It's absolutely natural.
This is pure natural radiation. Just absorb
pure
it.
Natural radiation. You should get out there and be using that to charge up your aura and be ready for the future. So I think the main thing about this is that just how much preparation was ready, and a lot of companies actually activated various plans. As you say, the satellite companies had been doing things. I heard some of the satellite companies actually turned side on, so the solar sails weren't facing the sun in case it knocked them out of orbits, and all sorts of strings that you don't think of until they tell you about them, and you go like, oh, okay, sure, for sure, right? If you're going to have a solar event that's going to triple the amount of solar energy hitting your panels, it could actually blow you out of orbit.
Right.
So that sort of stuff. But I think the main takeaway here is that while there was some minor disruptions, it wasn't enough to destroy the world. Does that mean that there's going to be more? I don't know.
Well, as you said, I think these things go in 11-year cycles, and so I think 2025 is the peak of that cycle. So we will we'll get to experiment and see. But it's good to know that there are precautions in place and monitoring in place to help us prepare for these events.
Yes, and it is worth knowing that there are more coronal mass ejections happening even as we speak. There was another one. This is Friday. There was another one yesterday, and it was a really substantial coronal mass ejection. And as you say, Drew, this is a known period. It will happen every 11 years, and there's still another year in the cycle of this current weather pattern before it goes away. If you think of it as like a tornado or a cyclone, it just happens to run at 2 years long or something like that. Right.
Yeah, one more note from that Scientific American article. Geomagnetic storm strength can be measured by nanoteslas, and that is Nikola Tesla, not the automobile. Earth's magnetic field has a baseline of approximately negative 20 nanoteslas. The Carrington event, which was a huge solar storm back in the 1800s, hit somewhere between negative 900 and negative 1,750 nanoteslas. By comparison, the recent solar storm rated negative 412 nanoteslas, just to give you some scale of what we're talking about.
Hmm. Uh, a Tesla, by the way, if go and read up on Wikipedia, it is it's a mind-bogglingly large unit of measure, which is why you're measuring nanoteslas. Which is there are some weird things in science where the actual base unit of a Tesla is this enormously and practically large amount.
Yeah.
It's like capacitors when we talk about farads. The amount of charge a capacitor holds at a single farad is an enormous capacitor. Anyway.
A couple more stories before we wrap. A few Linux projects are considering policies that would ban contributions that were made with the help of AI tools. They are worried about concerns over copyright ethics and quality.
Yeah, so there's two organizations here, and NetBSD was the primary thing, and they described AI-generated code as tainted due to unclear copyright and encourage users not to submit if they are not the sole author. That is, don't go and use AI-generated tools to generate the code and then submit that to the NetBSD library. And when I did some searching, I found out that Gen 2 Linux also banned AI-generated code last month. Their rationale, which is much clearer, they're much more further down the pipeline of producing communications on this, as they say, we have copyright concerns. The regulations concerning copyright of generated contents is still emerging worldwide, not just in the US, right? It's a global thing. And using such material could pose a danger of copyright violation. So the logic here is that if AI generates code that is based on someone else's copyright, like Stack Overflow, or they took it from someone's blog, and then you then use those algorithms or that code and put it into these kernels, then you may or may not have the rights to that.
Yep.
And while we know that some courts have said that any AI-generated images cannot have copyright associated with them, they are copyright-free because they're not done by a human in the copyright law. I think that's a US ruling.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
That's not necessarily going to apply to written text, Drew. So, and who wants to fund that court case is another thing. Then they go on to flag quality concerns, saying popular LLMs are really great at generating plausibly looking but meaningless content. So, and we know that. So hallucination or just producing trash content that seems to be generally accepted as true. And they don't want to take the risk of lowering the quality of Gen 2 projects or of requiring, and this is the key, unfair human effort from developers and users to review contributions and detect the mistakes resulting from the use of AI. So, if you submit trash content, then someone's actually got to go out there and discover the trash content and work much harder to get rid of it than if they had not submitted trash content in the first place, which is a thing. And then they go on about ethical concerns, but that's a bit more of a wafty. They're saying like, blatant copyright violations, operations about the huge use of energy and water, advertising and use of AI models has caused significant harm to employees and a reduction of service quality, and LLMs have been empowering all kinds of spams and scams. I know my inbox is a tragedy of marketing spam that's all AI generated. I'm getting really good at recognizing AI marketing slop at this point. And,
I sort of wonder if on the quality concern front, software quality is always an issue. Humans can also write bad and sloppy code, but maybe AI means you can write more sloppy code faster, which is more work for them.
I think the point here is that if we just wait a bit, like you don't have to, and I understand why people are jumping into AI generated code. It's so much efficient, so much, obviously if it was going to take you 5 days and you go to an AI and in 2 hours you've got a piece of code that works, the temptation is strong, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
But if we just slow down a little bit and let these things prove themselves out and we work out how to test and validate and improve all of that, then maybe that's where we want to be. And I think putting the brakes on and saying, let's just slow down a little bit is probably not unwise in the case of AI. I just believe there's just so much hype and, listening to Scam Altman just randomly make statements that people suck up and believe as if it's almost, remember we talked about, he's going to say, if you just gave me 7 trillion, I could do something for the universe or whatever. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
Show about, and this week it's like, oh yeah, no, we're working on, and it's just ridiculous. It's just absolute rubbish. This guy just says anything at this point. And, and it's hard to, turning into an Elon Musk who says things and you've always got to go like, is he high? Or is he just saying something to get a reaction? Or is he actually saying something that's realistic? And,
yes.
And I'm sort of, that's where I am with AI.
Yeah, me too. All right, moving on. Cisco Systems reported their third quarter earnings. The company brought in revenues of $12.7 billion, down 13% year over year. According to CNBC, that's the steepest revenue decline in 15 years. They had net income of $1.9 billion, down 41% year over year. By sector, networking revenues were $6.5 billion, down 27%. Security grew 3%. Observability grew 14%. However, Cisco still managed to beat Wall Street estimates, and they also raised their full year revenue forecast slightly, so it still smiles all around.
Once again, Cisco manages to just beat the Wall Street estimates by the smallest amount. It's usually a penny.
It was a fractional margin. Yeah, it was amazing.
You could bet on Cisco to typically beat them unless something really, Sales were $12.7 billion, down 13% year over year. Now, the reason for that, of course, is that during COVID, a lot of enterprises went out and bought a lot of stuff, ordered a lot of stuff, and then Cisco's much vaunted supply chain failed, and they weren't able to deliver, and customers had everything on back order. Instead of canceling those orders, usually because they were locked in, because they said, we'll only accept your order as long as you don't cancel it. And so it took Cisco, I think, nearly 4 years to clear the backlog. The backlog is now cleared. That was last year, long after COVID is finished, by the way. And the story that they're giving to the markets is that customers now have all of these assets that they've ordered and acquired, and they're not using them. So they're still in the process of deploying them. They haven't been consumed.
Yep.
They're holding on to that inventory. And so Cisco will get better once customers have used up all of that inventory that was a result of COVID. And there is a slowdown in enterprise spending broadly. We've seen it's not entirely consistent. Some areas are up, some are down. And I still believe that there are signs that some customers, and increasingly more customers, are turning away from Cisco, and hence the low growth is probably there. But investors and analysts who know much more about this than me are saying they don't feel that significant. They think that Cisco will remain a stable, low growth business that throws off a shared dividend. And it will continue on its way. It's an elephant, and it'll just keep waddling its way forward.
Yeah. So one highlight from the financial results is that Splunk is already driving revenue for the $413 million for one quarter. So that's definitely great for Cisco. And CEO Chuck Robbins said the company has identified 5,000 Cisco customers that could become meaningful Splunk customers, and salespeople have been dispatched. So expect a knock on your door if you're not already using Splunk and you're a Cisco customer.
He actually said, we're excited about the fact that basically we've identified these 5,000 customers where Splunk traditionally has had no footprint. And the goal there is to have the Cisco sellers open the door for the Splunk team. There's also a spiff in place to incent Cisco sellers to support this activity, said Gary Steele, former CEO of Splunk, who is now Cisco president of go-to-market. So in the next few, if they haven't already been on your doorstep pushing Splunk, if you have a direct relationship with Cisco sales, they will absolutely be taking you out to steak dinners so that you buy Splunk. And they have a very, very strong financial motivation to do so. So that's what Chuck is alluding to. He's basically thrown the salespeople a big packet of money and said, if you can sell, go out there. And so the dogs are unpacked. I looked up the word spiff, Drew. I haven't actually looked it up in a long time, but spiff is a slang for an immediate bonus for a sale. So most commissions are sort of paid on a trailing basis. You get a commission on invoice. But a spiff is not only do you get your commission, you get an extra bonus. So as soon as the deal is committed, you get a straight up deal in your hand. In the old days, it used to be like, if I could sell 10 copies of Microsoft Word, I would get $100 worth of vouchers or something to a thing. It was a straight up, and it was called a spiv. I never really looked into it, but that's what it is. Apparently it's a backronym. It's a word that comes back in the depths of time, and we now call it a sales process inventory incentive something, right? But apparently the word comes from somewhere else. I suspect it's one of these things that comes out of the Jewish language. It feels like a Jewish word from some time back in time to me. But, it's basically a straight up bonus. If you can sell a particular product, and you're a sales rep, you get a whack in the hand to close that deal. So you're highly motivated. It's not conditional. It's not part of your targets. It's not conditional. It's you close the deal, bang, you get a straight up cash bonus. Yeah. And that highly motivates, salespeople who are, of course, corner operated. That's what we do. That's what they're for.
I wonder if that has anything to do with spiffy. I don't know. Yeah, if anybody's a linguist out there who has insights, let us know. packetpushers.net/FU. We'd love to do a little etymology here. All right, our last story for the show. Facebook parent company Meta is shutting down Workplace. If you aren't familiar with that, it's a competitor to Teams. The company launched a few years ago to try to get into the enterprise collaboration market. It didn't work out, so they are shutting it down.
Pretty funny though, right? The idea that you could put Facebook, work, and enterprise into a single sentence is just comical to me. It's just not. I mean, Facebook's ability to go and chase down stupid ideas is unlimited. They have so much money being spun off by the ad business. Allocating $1 billion to start up a business just because Zuck thinks so. That's what they do. Yep. And we called it. We just said that nobody's ever going to take, say, Facebook seriously. However, I believe that Facebook work was actually successful in various places in certain countries around the world. So it does actually have users, but bad day for them.
Yeah, they're going to transition you over to, I guess, Zoom's workplace product. That's what I read in one of the announcements. And Greg, I saw this announcement, this headline, and I was like, should I put it in the show notes? And I thought, no, it's just shooting fish in a barrel. But then you put it in here, so I'm going to take a shot. Yeah, nobody. In the announcement, Facebook said they're transitioning away from their efforts in workplace to go to put those efforts into AI and the metaverse. Yeah. So yeah, they're shutting down a product that nobody wanted in the enterprise to work on products that nobody wants anywhere else.
No, well, and if you're working on that team, good luck. You've done nothing, you've achieved nothing, and now you go on to work on something that'll probably get the same result. We'll see how it goes.
We'll see.
Good luck with that.
Good luck. All right, that wraps up the news portion. We don't have a tech bite, so this is the end. Greg, where can folks find you if they want to see you online?
You can find me in the Packet Pushers Slack channel. If you ever got a question or you want to have a chat about something, don't hesitate to pop over there. There's lots of people in the crew. We talk all the time, and it's normal people. They're not, chat
It's a good bunch. Yeah, it's a good bunch.
It's a good bunch. Yeah, so come on over to the Slack channel. If you go to packetpushers.net/Slack, and you can go and sign up to join the Slack channel if you're not already in there.
Yeah, I think it's also now Slack, packetpushers.net/community, but yes, same thing. I'm Drew Commodore Murray. I'm also in the Slack channel, and I'm also on LinkedIn and blogging at packetpushers.net. Thanks to our sponsor, Nokia. And as always, thanks to you for listening. If you like the show, please give us a like on or a recommendation on Apple Podcasts or tell a friend about it. As always, thanks for listening.